it's my pleasure to introduce to you our colleague John Hyland, who earned his PhD in 2005 at the University of Chicago. He taught since 2006 at Christopher Newport University in Newport News, Virginia, where he holds the rank of professor in the Department of History. He is well known in the field of Achaemenid studies. His first book was Persian Interventions, the Achaemenid Empire, Athens and Sparta, 450 to 386 BCE, which was published in 2018. He is currently writing a new monograph on Persia's Greek campaigns and their Near Eastern imperial context. And he is as well editing a companion for Brill on war in ancient Iran. So please welcome John Hyland.
Thank you very much to Marissa and Lexi, to Rahim and Robert, and all of our generous hosts here in Los Angeles. It's a great pleasure and an honor to be included in this wonderful opportunity to bring a new generation into the wonders of the Achaemenid world. I'm going to be speaking today on an aspect of my research looking at a frontier region of the Persian Empire. And so we're going to look at Lydia as a borderland on the northwestern Persian frontier and think about the ways in which Lydians are integrated into the wider world empire of the Achaemenids. The conquest of Sardis and the Lydian kingdom in the mid-6th century BCE was a formative moment in Persian imperial expansion. Preceding Cyrus's capture of Babylon, it was arguably the first opportunity for Persia's rulers to incorporate a large territorial kingdom with state institutions and a strong dynastic political tradition into the fabric of their growing world empire. If we wish to gain insights into the formation of new political loyalties and social practices in the context of imperial integration, the experience of Lydian subjects in the early Tespid Achaemenid state calls out for our attention. This topic is not without its challenges. Not only does the precise date of the conquest remain elusive, but we suffer from scarcity of Lydian documentary evidence to set against Herodotus' narrative, which poses problems of historicity and refrains from extensive attention to Lydian matters after the fall of Croesus. There are no Lydian archives comparable to the Babylonian entrepreneurial and priestly collections, or even standalone autobiographical texts, such as the Egyptian testimonial of Ujaharesnet, to assist our study of a society in transition from local to imperial rule. On the other hand, a century's worth of discoveries by the Sardis archaeological expedition has illuminated Lydian material culture and social fabrics before and after the conquest, and its recent finds have revealed dramatic changes in settlement patterns connected with the Persian arrival. New work on the Persepolis Fortification Archive has expanded our evidence for communication and travel between Sardis and Achaemenid Iran. Most recently, Anatolian linguistic studies have reappraised key personal names in a handful of Lydian language inscriptions, interpreting them as references to the Myrmnad royal family and Croesus himself, despite their Achaemenid period dates. My paper today seeks to synthesize and connect these new pieces of evidence alongside Herodotus' scattered anecdotes to see what light we can shed on the first half-century of Persian Lydia. After the initial violence of Cyrus's conquest, which has been illustrated by the excavation finds at the gate complexes and Palace Terrace, Herodotus describes a political settlement that incorporated members of the Lydian elite into Sardis's new administration. A certain Pakties, to whom Cyrus entrusted fiscal duties, led an unsuccessful revolt against Persian rule shortly after the king's departure, but failed to dislodge Cyrus's forces from Sardis. As far as we can tell, and in striking contrast with the cases of Babylonia and Egypt. This was the last time that Lydia attempted to break away from the empire. Herodotus describes the aftermath of Pythios' revolt in terms of a widespread social subjugation, which he attributes to the advice of Croesus, the former king, allegedly spared and carried off into exile with Cyrus's traveling court. The story claims that the Persians chose not to expel the Lydian population from Sardis, but instead took away their weapons and transformed them into merchants and musicians, making them essentially equivalent to women, after which the Lydians never troubled the empire again. This tale of gendered subjugation is best understood as a parallel or borrowing from a long-standing Near Eastern motif, most recently discussed in an article by Gina Konstantopoulos, that employs the changing of men into women as a metaphor for the imposition of fear on one's enemies, removing their will to fight. Several Assyrian texts employ this concept as a curse on the disloyal, or an explanation of an opponent's defeat. And Herodotus later alludes to the idea in Xerxes' exclamation about Artemisia at Salamis, that my women have become men and my men have become women. Herodotus presumably integrates a similar tradition, explaining how the once mighty Lydians could have become compliant imperial subjects. That being said, Herodotus' claim that Cyrus allowed the Lydian population to remain at Sardis also distorts a more complex social transition. The recent archaeological discoveries testify to a dramatic process of de-urbanization, as the former Lydian capital was emptied of structures that had filled the area within the pre-Persian walls. Again, if we look at the map here from the Sardis survey, you have the pre-Persian walls there in the purple, and there are several major buildings within that wall circuit that are part of the destruction layers sometime in the 540s and then are not rebuilt. Nicholas Cahill sums up thus, I quote, "In every case where the stratigraphy is preserved, Lydian public buildings and houses in the center of the city were apparently destroyed during the Persian capture, and that destruction was followed by a period of abandonment, or at most greatly reduced presence without clear signs of occupation." End quote. Although some suburbs, such as the Pactolus North settlement, and we can see this, if you can see number 10, just to the west of the city walls along the Pactolus Valley. A few such suburbs maintained residential continuity. Many others disappeared, and much of the city population seems to have shifted outwards, perhaps dispersing into numerous villages and estates across the Gygean Lake Basin and the Hermus River Plain. This would correspond with a settlement phenomenon emphasized in Christopher Roosevelt's survey of Lydian archaeology, which stresses a 70% increase in the number of inhabited sites across the central Lydian plain, precisely in the late 6th to early 5th centuries. This transition to rural landholding appears to have given Lydian elites opportunities to prosper under the new regime, while simultaneously showing off their wealth and alluding to the pre-Persian past in tumulus burials that emulated the Myrmnad royal tombs known at Bin Tepe. We can consider Herodotus' references to a prominent Lydian aristocrat in Persian service against this complex background of social change and wealthy status display. The historian reports that Cambyses' satrap, Oroetes, employed one Myrsos, son of Gyges, as his representative in the talks that led to the capture of Polycrates, the ruler of Samos. The same Myrsos, son of Gyges, appears again 3 decades later, cooperating with Persian generals against the Ionian and Carian revolts, although Herodotus says nothing of his activities other than his death in battle. The extension of Myrsos' career as late as the 490s, though, suggests that he would not yet have been able to pass adolescence at the time of Cyrus's conquest. He most likely represents a second generation of Lydian-Persian partnership, following the involvement of his father, Gyges, in the earlier phase of imperial accommodation. The fact that a noble named for the founder of the Myrmidon dynasty could survive in Persian service is striking, as is Myrsos' retention of social authority, despite the anarchy of Darius' succession and the violent death of Oroetes. This was no small feat, considering Bisutun and its grim accounting of the liar kings and their followers impaled alongside them in other parts of the empire. Yet despite their satraps' reluctance to align with Darius, the Lydians themselves are not presented among Bisutun's rebels. And unlike their peers in Babylonia, Media, and Egypt, no Lydian liar kings sought to parlay descent from Gyges or Croesus into a claim to Myrmidon royal revival. Herodotus' story of Oroetes' death at the hands of the Persian Sardis garrison stresses Persian agency, but should also imply that Lydian figures such as Myrsos made a pragmatic choice to transfer their loyalty to Darius and his representatives. Despite Herodotus' failure to name other Lydian contemporaries, Myrsos should not be viewed as an exceptional case. More likely, he represented a larger group of elite Lydians whose family prominence originated before the conquest and continued under Persia. Edward Rung's 2015 study on post-conquest Lydia argued that the Lydians' political consciousness of their Myrmidon past faded away after Pythios' revolt. But the success of families retaining old royal names or burying their dead in tumuli that evoked the old royal tombs suggests a more complex social transition, as the elites' reminders and signifiers of the old regime strengthened the value of their loyalty to the new one. While Herodotus' anecdotes place Myrsos in fairly narrow contexts of diplomatic and military service, of course, Lydians had many other roles to play in the administration of Achaemenid Sardis, and should have provided much of the initial expertise and systemic organization for the governance of the former Myrmidon kingdom. Surviving evidence for Lydian political structures is limited, but there are hints of a framework that veterans of Croesus' administration would have been able to hand over intact to Cyrus. This includes the division of Lydia's outer zones into districts under subordinate governors at hubs such as Dascylium or Gordium, and the prominent usage of seals, which may have been deeply relevant to the organization, storage, and authentication of palace records. In the case of Babylonia, Cyrus superimposed a Persian satrap over many pre-existing city and temple offices, most of which remained in the hands of men who started under Nabonidus. Rung has argued for the exclusion of Lydians from local administration in response to Pythios' revolt, since all the known Sardis satraps stem from Iranian backgrounds. But this concentration on only the highest level of government is misleading. In our Babylonian parallel, the majority of lower-ranking functionaries under Gubaru and his entourage were local, and the same was surely the case at Sardis, where many of the seals that date to the Achaemenid period may have belonged to Lydians involved in lower levels of administrative service. We are fortunate to have our most explicit testimony on the Sardis administration from the Persepolis Fortification Archive, in which the satrap Artaphernes appears in at least 14 texts between 506 and 494 as an authorizer or destination for travelers moving between Sardis and Fars. Although we lack comparable physical documents from Sardis itself, the satrap's oversight of the travel system and use of Sardis as a royal highway hub indicates the presence of a scribal system capable of interfacing with other satrapal bureaucracies and the royal household. As recent studies have shown, provincial administrative networks like the Persepolis system operated out of a central seat from which officials in multiple department branches exercised hierarchical control over subordinates in district centers, permitting central management and oversight of commodity intake and dispensation and logistical support of personnel. Sardis's satrapal personnel thus should have included not only the 1,000 spear bearers named by Herodotus, but dozens, if not hundreds, of administrative staff, including multilingual scribes, storage and logistics officials, inspectors, professional guides, and express couriers, some of whom appear by name when surviving Persepolis tablets record their receipt of rations at the end of journeys to Iran. It would be extraordinary if most of these individuals constituted Persian transplants to Lydia. In fact, the limited sample of Persepolis references contains several Western Anatolian personal names, which speak to the practice of local recruitment from Lydia and its larger periphery. For example, in this tablet, PFNN 2108, a guide named Uzilish escorts a party of Yauna from Sardis to Persepolis, bearing a halmi from the satrap Artaphernes. The onomastic form, Uzilish, looks to be Carian, with a classic Carian ending comparable to names such as Mausolus, Ebanolis, Aradolis, and others. In two other new journal entries dealing with a single travel party, two men with the possibly Lycian names of Hizala and Mida escort a large party of Lycian captives from Artaphernes to Persepolis. Another possible case involves Atia, a Pyridazish messenger en route from Sardis to Fars, whose name may reflect the common Lydo-Phrygian personal name Atis, although there an alternative is possible in an Iranian name derived from Athi. Finally, we sometimes find Western Anatolian named officials at work in Iran, some in low-level positions, such as Shapish, a guide with a Lycian personal name, assigned to escort a Lycian Kurtash party between sites in southern Iran. A more senior supply official named Adrashta, whose name resembles the common Lydo-Phrygian Atrastas, offers a plausible example at a more prominent mid-level position in the Persepolis regional bureaucracy. We might conjecture that he came to the attention of the royal household during Darius's Sardis residence, or traveled to Iran on satrapal assignment and then received a posting in the heartland through Artaphernes' patronage. In this context, we should recall the occurrence of the famous Persepolis tablet written in Phrygian, and may consider the likelihood of further Anatolian scribal activity, if relatively low in volume, within the imperial heartland. At Sardis itself, the presence of local staff in partnership with Artaphernes and his entourage suggests that multilingualism, well studied in other Achaemenid provinces, must have been a key working feature of the satrapal chancery. This is supported by the evidence for Lydian epigraphic usage already in the late Myrmidon period, and the eventual use of Lydian alongside Aramaic in the later 5th or early 4th century tomb of Manes, LW1. In respect to the latter, Elspeth Dusenberry has written of absorption of the Achaemenid chancery language as a power fact, in which a Lydian invokes the power of Persian justice. At the same time, the Lydian language may have functioned alongside Aramaic, not only in private funerary settings, but in the Sardis administration as well, where bilingualism would be essential for record keeping involving a mostly Lydian and Western Anatolian staff in tandem with small numbers of Persian settlers. This multilingual dynamic is evident in a stamp seal in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, bearing the Lydian inscription Kuldan Lim, I belong, or I am of Kuldans. This stone is decorated with a bearded, crowned Persian royal figure in Elamite robe, standing above a pair of rampant lions and overseen by an eagle-winged disc. The adoption of the seal as a marker of social status, associated with both Lydian and Iranian officialdom, and its combination of Lydian script with Persian imagery of royalty and divine protection, represents a wonderful syncretism of power representations. It echoes comparable hybrids of Persian and subject imagery and language in artifacts from other regions, illustrating the potential for a wealthy Lydian to enjoy prosperity within a wider imperial world. In a recent study, Katrina Euler and David Zasville have proposed its commissioning by a Persian priest at Sardis. Alternatively, one might view this as the possession of a Lydian official within the world of satrapal bureaucracy. Euler and Zosville, in their 2019 article, placed the seal in a context of a more provocative argument regarding the numinous figure Kuldans, named both here and in several inscribed Lydian texts on stone, LW4b 23, 43, and 62. Drawing on recent re-evaluations of certain Lydian phonetic sound values, they suggest that the letters conventionally transcribed as a lambda and a D have been misread, and that the former represented an R sound and the latter a sibilant. They thus argue that what was previously rendered kuldans should rather produce kursans or quersans, which they postulate to be the Lydian name of Croesus. In a recent discussion of another inscription, LW22, Ilya Yakubovich made a similar argument for the reading of a personal name, Mlumnas, as Merimnas, or the name of the Merimnad royal family. He suggested that this document recorded a compact between the populace of Achaemenid Sardis and a group of extended royal kin, now entrusted with certain cultic duties on behalf of the Sardis community. In turn, Euler and Zosville postulate that the god formerly known as Kuldans should now be understood as a deified Croesus, whose worship was not only tolerated, but actively cultivated by the Persian administration at Sardis. This came out in 2019. I've not yet been able to find responses to their hypothesis in print from other Anatolian linguists. I expect it to generate further debate in light of previous scholarship on Croesus's name, which has generated several alternative forms, such as Croesus, Karwiasi, and Croestu. Nevertheless, the linguistic argument is plausible enough to deserve a critical historical commentary, imagining what it would mean in the context discussed above if Euler's and Zosville's theory were to be correct. The heart of their argument involves not only this seal, but also LW23, a famous inscription found near the Sardis Artemis Temple, in which a priest with an Iranian name, Mithridastas, son of Mitratas, dedicates a temple precinct to Kuldans, or Kursans, and Artemis. Although earlier conjectures placed this text in the 5th or 4th centuries, Euler and Zosville move it back to the 6th century, on the grounds of supposedly archaic letter forms that later go out of usage, and the text's inscription on limestone, rather than the marble more commonly used for classical and Hellenistic epigraphy at Sardis. They go on to interpret the text as a record of the establishment of cult to Croesus in association with the Artemis temple and priesthood, with direct Persian knowledge and participation. Counter-arguments are possible on some aspects of their case, notably the problem that a related document involving the same individual's deposit of property is inscribed on marble. Nevertheless, as also noted in Beth Dusenberry's study of Achaemenid Sardis, the recording of such formal documents in Lydian without Aramaic or Greek translation seems more compatible with an Achaemenid rather than Hellenistic date. The text contains an apparent dating formula, 5 vertical strokes with the word dan, or year, which Euler and Zosville take as a reference to the passage of 5 years since Croesus's death. They date it to 542, accepting the Nabonidus Chronicle reading for 547 as connected to Lydia. Given the controversy surrounding that document and the lack of parallels for dating from a monarch's death, a simple regnal date probably makes more sense and could put it in the reign of a number of Teispid or Achaemenid rulers. The concept of religious honors for a deceased ruler would hold a certain attraction from an early Achaemenid perspective. The Persepolis records show Darius establishing funerary offerings at the tombs of Cambyses and his own father Vishtaspa in Fars. The permission of honors to a pre-Achaemenid ruler deposed by Persian conquest would of course be more unusual, conveying recognition of the legitimacy of Lydia's former rulers, worthy of veneration comparable with that of Iranian royal families. But it might find some justification as a reward for the pragmatic loyalty of Lydian elites who refrained from revolt in the chaos of 522 and loyally served the Achaemenid administration thereafter. Participation in state-sanctioned cult to the former ruler might then have provided a vehicle for the combined display of social distinction and loyalty that we see in the cases of individuals like Myrsos. As for Mithridates, while direct Persian involvement in Croesus' cult cannot be excluded, it would be premature to assume his automatic Iranian identity from name and patronymic alone. And again, given comparisons with other regions, it's not impossible that we have Western Anatolians adopting Iranian names in the early Achaemenid period. To conclude, the state of our evidence leaves many unanswered questions, but the theory that honors to Croesus' memory continued in Persian Sardis adds a further element to the multifaceted identity claimed by Lydian elites in the Achaemenid Empire. While Myrsos served the satraps and countless other Lydians and Anatolians filled in lower ranks of administration, local landowners could prosper in the space between Artaphernes at Sardis and the Myrmnad tombs at Bintepe. This flourishing privilege was founded on an amalgamation of pride in the memories of the autonomous royal past and displays of service in present and future. Rather than discarding the significance of past rulers, it appears that the nobles of Sardis and their Persian partners found ways to incorporate the legacy of Croesus under the parasol of Achaemenid world rule. Thank you.